Thank you so much. It's really good to be here. We were here with you a little over a month ago, and that felt shocking to me. I don't know about you, but you might have noticed that something strange seems like it's happened to time over the last 4 months, and that's really related to stress. There is something to that. That said, I'm glad to be here, and I want to remind you that this hour belongs to you. So if any time during this presentation, there's something that strikes you, resonates with you, something you'd like to comment on, or if you have a question, please ask through the Q&A or the chat, and then they will be directed to me. And I'm happy to pause this presentation at any time because, again, this is really for you. And I want to acknowledge you and applaud you for taking this hour out of your day, because what it tells me is that you are reaching out for the support, that you're practicing some really good self-care, and that you really do want to have some helpful information that can help you to navigate this transition that we're all experiencing in very different ways, in a way that feels really skillful and very, very well resourced. So you might notice that the title of the presentation is Going Back or Moving Forward. And I really do pose this as a question. And it's an important question for a number of reasons, and it really does help to frame today's presentation. And I want to begin with a story. There are certain things that happen to us in life that almost get burned indelibly into our minds, these moments that we will never forget, and they exist for us as snapshots in time. And one of those moments for me happened on March 19th when I helped my sister close her salon. She's a small business owner here in northeastern Pennsylvania. She's been in the salon industry for 30 years. She had to close her doors without any sense of when they would open again. And it was a really difficult day, fraught with a lot of emotion. And again, I'll never forget it, this moment between two sisters. And the road ahead, this is why I use this image. We know that there's a road ahead, that there's a pathway, but we're not sure how to navigate it because we don't quite know where it's going. And we don't know what the destination is going to look like once we get to the other side of this, if there is an other side. So I want you to start to pay attention to the ways in which you've been both thinking about and talking about this global pandemic, social, civil unrest, this environment that we find ourselves in that is fraught with unpredictability, uncertainty, lots of stress and overwhelm. About 2 months after she closed her salon, we met there again. So we were just sort of organizing things, putting things away. And we were talking about all of the anxieties that occurred at the moment of having to shut down. And many of us felt those anxieties, right? Because it happened really abruptly. And these new anxieties were emerging. And the new anxieties were about bringing her team back to work and reopening, and what that was going to look like, and what that was going to feel like, and the kinds of anxieties that her team members were having. And I could tell as we were having the conversation that her own anxiety was increasing and that we were going to a really bleak place. And I said to her, what would it mean and how would it feel if we started to talk about what's happening differently? If we began to reframe the experience through our language? I said, what would it mean if you were to talk with your team about this idea that, you know what, we are not going back to work. We are not returning to the workplace, but rather we are moving into something new and different. We are moving forward and into something new and different. Now, there will be elements of our previous workplace that will still exist, but this is a new time. And this notion of going back isn't really one that we can lean into in a way that feels supportive and feels exciting. So think about the difference between the phrase going back to work versus moving forward and into something new and different. I can tell you, and this really is linked to what I call the power of a single conversation. Sometimes we can have a conversation with another person that creates so much momentum that it actually lifts and elevates the two people who are talking, and it pushes them forward in a positive direction. These are actually my favorite conversations to have, and they're so necessary right now. But when I planted this seed that perhaps we're moving forward and into something new and different, I can tell you that it was only a few days later that my sister began making major plans to renovate her salon from the bottom up, so that when she did open her doors, it's a completely different place. Now, not every business has the opportunity to renovate to the degree that she did and to just make changes at very, very fundamental levels to her business. But she did take this notion of moving forward rather seriously. There's a very different energy associated with the idea of moving forward and into something different. For my sister, and for a lot of people that work with this reframe, we begin to think a lot about what possibilities exist, what potential exists for me to operate at a different level. There can be a lot of excitement around this notion of going forward. And I want to be very clear that we also want to acknowledge the discomfort that can be associated with that kind of change. But for my sister and for so many others, going forward as opposed to returning back to work also helped to stimulate her creativity so that she could begin to create a new version of her business, a new manifestation of her business that actually, in retrospect, was needed. Unfortunately, it took the catalyst of a global pandemic to kick her into action, but she took this idea of moving forward very seriously. She's a different kind of business owner now. Her employees work very differently. Their connection is different, and her entire organization is different. Again, it doesn't even look like the same place. The reason that I use this example and that I bring this to you is because one of the most therapeutic things that we can do for ourselves at all levels of our life is we can ask ourselves in the midst of crisis and transition, we can ask ourselves really important questions related to how we are seeing the situation. What is the lens through which I am seeing the situation? The lens of the language of we're going back was creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of despair. Again, when we had that conversation, the energy of it was we were like completely in the pits. What if we were to look at the same situation, global pandemic crisis, and simultaneously ask ourselves what kind of potential exists when we think about things differently? So what I'm describing to you is actually a mindfulness-based strategy, and we are a mindfulness-based company. And although we bring mindfulness meditation practices into corporations, we also teach mindfulness at a much larger level, in the sense that when we become mindful, we're really inviting ourselves to first become aware of what's happening, what's going on, and next to engage in a process like reframing, which is a very conscious decision I make that begins with this awareness that I'm in a situation that's causing discomfort or stress or suffering. And I pay attention to that. And then I make a decision to become part of an inquiry about it, to ask some important questions about the situation. What is this discomfort I'm feeling? Is it anxiety? Is it sadness? Is it anger? Is it fear? And then of the situation itself, how am I seeing this? How might I see what's happening differently? What am I missing? Or what am I not seeing? Is there a perspective? Is there a way of looking at what's happening that can move me forward? So the example that I gave is just in that moment of talking with my sister, the power of a single conversation and asking her, okay, look, the way that you're talking about this, going back, carries a certain energy that's not moving anything forward. It's keeping you stuck. So what if we were to think about this notion of moving forward and into something new and different? So suddenly, crisis becomes paired with another really important idea, and that's opportunity. Now, I want to be really clear about something. For a very long time, a few decades, I have been seeing the Chinese kanji symbol for the word crisis. And it's been said that inherent in that symbol, simultaneous to crisis, is the notion of opportunity. I've since done a little bit of research on the truth and the validity of this, and I will tell you that it is questionable, although some people believe that it's true. But I share this with you because I want you to contemplate what would it mean and how would it feel if we were to pair the experience of crisis simultaneously with the notion of opportunity. For example, could you imagine what it would have meant for you when you were growing up if you had learned at a young age, hey, whenever there's crisis, look for the opportunity. Know that crisis is hard, it's not easy for anyone, and also look for the opportunity. That could have been a real game changer. I know it would have been a game changer for me, but it's a very simple example of a mindfulness moment where you're asking yourself a really important question. How am I seeing this? And how might I see this differently? What I've just described really reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that has lived with me for a very long time, but is extremely meaningful for me now. In fact, I often wonder if I learned about this quote so many years ago because I knew that at some point in my life I've really needed it. And the quote reads, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When my sister made that shift from the dismal, despairing nature of going back to work to, we're moving forward and into something new and different, she changed the way she looked at her situation. And as a result, everything changed for her, as evidenced by just the way that her salon looks presently. I mean, the appearance of her space is a wonderful manifestation of what I'm describing here. But you see, we can reframe at all levels of our lives. We can reframe in our professional lives. We can reframe in our personal lives. We can reframe in our parenting relationships. You can use this kind of inquiry whenever you're with someone, even if you're with your child. You can plant this seed that in any given moment, I have the opportunity to be very aware that I'm seeing everything I'm looking at through a certain lens. Is there another way I can view it? And it's really about, is there a way of viewing what's happening that propels me forward? In my conversation with my sister, I want to be clear that I was not suggesting that the global pandemic wasn't real or somehow needed to be diminished in terms of how much chaos it was causing her, but rather acknowledging this is a tough situation, but can I look for the potentials, the opportunities, the possibilities that are inherently part of being in crisis? It's not an either-or situation. I can certainly be with the discomfort of what's happening and simultaneously ask myself, is there a different way that I can think about this? Here's another example of a different way to think about something. This is a distinction between two really important words that we use all the time. I've been guilty of using them interchangeably, as have so many other people. But when you dive into what change and transition really mean, you'll see that they refer to two different processes that are actually connected. So change refers to all of the things in our external circumstances that are different. We use the global pandemic as an example. If you have moved forward and into your workspace after being at home working for a while or in another location, you may have noticed that there are aspects of your workspace that are really different to accommodate personal safety, professional safety. You may notice that the configuration of your family schedule has changed to accommodate what's happened. You might notice that there are changes in the way that your children are going to be educated, especially as we move forward into the fall and the winter. These are changes that are part of our life, but they're external to who we are. The word transition refers to how we are psychologically and emotionally handling the changes that have occurred in our external environment. A good example of this is a story that my sister-in-law shared about moving forward and into her workplace after being away for 3 months. And she said that, the configuration of the workspace is different to accommodate social distancing. And one of the biggest transitions, emotional things that she's going through, is the fact that they are no longer able to sit together at their communal table and share lunch. They have a small office space, and one of the things that they always loved to do is that they would each bring something in to the common kitchen at work, and they would prepare lunch together, and they would sit and eat lunch together. They can't do that anymore, and she told me she's having a real difficult time with that. So there's changes in the external space of her workplace. Then there's also this transition, how we emotionally and psychologically cope with external circumstances that have changed. So think about that for yourself, because part of mindfully navigating the emotional nature of what's happening, transition, we have to be really clear that there are certain things that we are experiencing that we might not quite understand. And this is one of the reasons why I like to bring this slide forth. And it's, how do we get clear about the things that we fear when there's crisis? What's really different about a global pandemic is that it does not have an end date. There are a lot of different crises that we have moved through as a planet. In my lifetime, there have been a number of different crises situations that have occurred that we have moved through. But there was always this sense that there was an end point, a stop point. This one is different. And because it's different, it's pretty unprecedented in our lifetime. So there are a lot of fears that are arising that are contributing to a sense of overwhelm and a lot of anxiety, but we don't necessarily name them. And one of the things we know about mindfulness and mindfulness practices as they relate to fear and overwhelm is this really simple formula. It's important to know what your fears anxiety stressors are, in other words, can I name them in order to tame them? And what we mean by taming is we're not kicking them out of our lives. We're not beating them to death. We're not pretending that they're not there. We are not allowing them to overwhelm us. We are naming them so that we can make important choices about how we're going to respond to the fear and the anxiety and the overwhelm that we're feeling. So there are a number of different things. In fact, I could probably have bullet points of 5 slides that would highlight the things that we are afraid of during crisis, like the one we're experiencing now. But I want to share this model with you because it's really helpful. It's a way of sort of drilling down on the 5 main fears that we as human beings have, pretty much globally. And I think you'll all agree with me once you learn the model. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. This model comes to us from the work of Dr. David Rock, who's a neuroscientist who also does a lot of work in the field of leadership. And this model aims to demonstrate 2 things. Number 1, what do all human beings need? These are kind of like our top needs as human beings. And secondly, what happens to us when any one of these needs is threatened? I can tell you that when any one of these things is threatened, we feel triggered, we feel reactive, we can get angry, we can go into stress response. I'm going to fight, I'm going to run, I'm going to shut down. These 5 fears, which create an acronym that we call SCARF, are all activated right now, which is one of the reasons why people's stress level feels really high. So I'm going to move through them, and then I'm going to show you how you can use them. The S of SCARF stands for safety, and this makes perfect sense. When you look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, what's on the bottom of that triangle, of that pyramid? Safety. Above all else, from the moment we come into our lives at birth, our fundamental need is to be safe, to feel secure, to feel a sense of stability. A global pandemic inherently makes us feel unsafe at all levels of our being. So whenever my safety is threatened, I have a chance of getting highly triggered and really overwhelmed. Certainty, very similar. We know that all human beings thrive when things feel certain. We love predictability. We love the stability and the groundedness that that provides. We want to know what's going to happen next. It's one of the reasons why so many of us lean into routine. We keep calendars. You might have noticed that keeping yourself meticulously organized has taken on an entirely new level of meaning over the course of the last 4 months. That reflects your need for certainty, because right now, there's not a whole lot that is certain. Whenever human beings have their certainty need threatened, they get scared, overwhelmed, or can go from 0 to 100 really quickly. Autonomy. Autonomy refers to our human need for independence. And we see this very, very early on in life. Observe a child who's learning how to crawl. Observe a child who's learning how to walk, run. Most of the time they're crawling, walking, running away from you. And it's just a little glimpse into how driven we are. We are hardwired for autonomy. Think about all the ways in which our own independence has been threatened I can't get in the car and just show up at my favorite restaurant and hope to sit down and have a meal and mingle with the other customers freely. I can't. I can't just show up at the grocery store without taking certain measures. There was a time when even leaving our houses, we could only do that under certain strict rules and regulations, and we might be going back to that. And many of us feel as if we are the teenager who just got the driver's license and the car keys have been taken away from us. It makes us crazy to have our autonomy threatened. So a little heads up for those of you who might be listening who have preteens or teens. Our need for independence is fiercely strong developmentally during those years. So if you've got kids at home that are preteens or teens and you're wondering why they might be yelling a lot or having rants and rages or really unhappy or very, very erratic in their emotions, please know that one of their fundamental human needs, their need for independence, is really threatened right now. And if you lead or manage, I want to invite you, even though things are pretty uncertain, one of the best ways to inspire a high level of productivity from those you lead or manage is to allow them opportunities to express their independence and their autonomy, to in overt and covert ways let them know that you trust them enough to make their own decisions on behalf of the project, the team, the organization. Autonomy goes a long way in leadership. We love to know that our leaders want to give us the reins for a bit. So never forget that. Relationship, and you know this, whenever your relationships feel that they're threatened in any way, we can become pretty fierce about it. We can get angry, terribly anxious and upset. And right now, there's a lot of ways in which relationship is threatened. The example that I gave earlier, my sister-in-law, her connections at her workplace really matter to her. And so not being able to sit around that communal table feels threatening to those collegial relationships. We think about families that are living together now 24/7. Most families have never spent this much time with their spouses, with their children in the same place. And so many relationships are fraught with the tension of all of that. Marriages are feeling the strain of all of that. People who are newly dating are feeling the strain of not being able to be together during this very strange time. So again, can feel fear, overwhelm, triggered when relationship is threatened. And then the last point is really important because we often forget about this. All human beings have a very strong need to know that they are being treated fairly and with dignity and respect. Think about those times in your life where you didn't feel that you were being treated fairly, where you felt that your dignity and your sense of respect was being threatened. Many of us get really upset when dignity and fairness is threatened. And so it's really important that we are mindful of those moments and what happens to us. We can get scared when we're not being treated fairly. We can get really triggered into anger when we think that we're not being treated fairly, when that dignity and sense of respect seems compromised in some way. So again, the SCARF model helps us to see, okay, all human beings to varying degrees have these needs. All human beings will get scared, stressed, overwhelmed, or really angry when any of these needs are threatened. right now we are living in a time where all five are threatened. Imagine sort of the alarm system that's going off inside of so many of us as we're questioning, am I safe? What is certain? Am I ever going to have my autonomy back? What am I going to do about these relationships right now that feel distanced or strained? And this seems awfully unfair, that this is happening at this time in my life. All of the children out there who feel like, man, I was bricked off of my high school prom or my college graduation, or I was robbed the opportunity to see my daughter walk down the aisle, or we were robbed the opportunity to take that trip to Europe that we've been saving years for this summer. So there can be this sense of this virus being really unfair and not treating any of us with a sense of dignity or respect. So how do you use this model? The next time that you're feeling really overwhelmed, stressed, or triggered, take a moment and run yourself through SCARF. Ask yourself, does my safety and certainty feel threatened? Is it autonomy? Is it relationship? Is it fairness? Sometimes it will be several of these things. If it's more than one, you're going to feel a much higher level of triggering and stress. So this is a really important way to get to know yourself. Because again, if I can know what's scaring me, what's bringing me to that point of near explosion, if I can know what it is, if I can name it, I can begin to tame it and make a decision about how I'm going to deal with it. When I first learned this model, I like to share that I carried the letters SCARF around with me on a cue card, a note card that I just had with me at all times. And every time that I felt triggered or upset, I'd take the card out and I'd run myself through all of the letters. And I did that for about a month until I learned the model by heart. And now at any given time, even now when I'm feeling, sort of on the verge of blowing up or really anxious and overwhelmed, I can guide myself through. It's a powerful mindfulness tool because as I'm guiding myself through, by the time I'm finished, that overwhelm and anger is diminished significantly. Another way that you can use this model is the next time you're in the presence of someone who's really upset or very triggered. They've gone from 0 to 100 and they're about to blow. And you're sort of standing there as kind of the recipient of it. You can stop and you, within yourself, can run yourself through the letters. And you can ask, oh, I wonder in what way is this person feeling not safe, or feels like I've robbed them of their autonomy, or doesn't feel like they're being treated fairly. If I can do that and kind of size up the situation, I have a much better chance of responding to that person in a way that's empathetic and compassionate. Because as you know, when someone's really upset in our presence, anxious, triggered, getting ready to blow up, we almost automatically go into defensiveness. We're getting ready to sort of fight back. In other words, we will naturally meet that energy. So this is a powerful tool that you can use to help to diffuse someone else's anger and stress and overwhelm. It is invaluable right now. So keep the notion of SCARF nearby. I would be remiss as a presenter who's talking about navigating transition if I didn't take a moment to just acknowledge that part of the stress and overwhelm that we feel is related to loss. And the reason that I bring this up is because increasingly I hear from a lot of individuals who will say, I think I'm kind of doing pretty good with all of this. I'm getting accustomed to this new normal, but I don't quite feel like I'm myself. And I don't really know what it is. It's that unnameable thing that is still unsettling. And more often than not, I will say to them, have you looked at loss? Most of the time we think about loss in terms of defined loss. Someone dies that we love, that is a defined loss. Someone gets ill and has certain aspects of their physical health compromised. That's a loss. The loss of a job, the loss of a role, those are obvious losses that we can easily identify and name. But then there are these other losses. There's limbo loss. Limbo loss is an agonizing kind of loss. Limbo loss occurs when, wow, I'm not feeling well, and I decide to go ahead and get tested for COVID, and I learn I might not get the results for a week. And in that week, I have to live in limbo loss, which is I don't know if I've lost or not. I don't know what the results are going to be. Or my company's on shaky ground, and there's some rumors that we might be okay for 3 months, but after the new year, I might not have a job. That's limbo loss. It's I might lose, but I'm not quite sure. That belongs in its own category, and it's rough. Anticipatory loss, I know I'm going to lose, but it just hasn't happened yet. And maybe we have discovered this about our company. We've got about 3 months left, and then we're dismantling. You know, I know it's going to happen. Or maybe you have a move scheduled. Maybe you're moving after the new year, and even though you haven't experienced the actual move yet, loss is happening. You're getting ready. Most important loss on this slide is what we call morning dreams. Man, are we feeling this now? So many of us are feeling this. We have all of these dreams about our futures. We have dreams if we're parents about watching our children graduate and walk down the aisle and have their first job experience and accomplishing all of these milestones along the way, even if it's that little graduation ceremony that they have at kindergarten into first grade. And so many of those things didn't get to happen. That's morning dreams. I had this dream for how it was supposed to be. It's not happening. It's not even like anything I ever imagined that it would be. There is loss associated with that. I just received a text message before coming on here today from a dear friend of mine who's very close to giving birth to her first child. And she has written beautifully in blogs about what it has meant to be pregnant during a global pandemic. It's been an interesting experience, but I have said to her, Anna, there's loss here too, you know, because this isn't how you ever imagined your pregnancy. This isn't how you imagined your baby shower being held over Zoom. The reason I bring the notion of loss up is because it's important to know that loss and the experience of mourning and grieving is inherently stressful. It drains and it depletes the system. So for those of you out there who might not be feeling as good as you'd like to, and you're not quite sure why, just kind of go to loss and see if there might be something there. Take very, very good care of your own brains and cognitive functioning during this period of time. There's just a couple of things that I want to say about this. And for the sake of time, I'm going to give a summarization of this slide. Please know that when we don't have our level of stress in check, and we haven't sort of gone through what we're doing here today, which is kind of like an inventory of how we're feeling about things, what can happen is we become so flooded with the stress hormone that our cognitive abilities become compromised. because we're really only operating out of one small part of the brain. And that is the back part of the brain, the deepest part of the brain, which is the area of the amygdala, which sort of generates our stress response. And when stress response is primarily flooding the brain, we experience high levels of brain fog. We can experience what I call intrusive or catastrophic thinking. And that's when we kind of get stuck on a thought about something really, really bad happening. And it's relentless. It just doesn't leave us. So you might find some of that happening. You also might find what we call tunnel vision. It's very common for the human brain to go into tunnel vision in the sense that when I'm in an acutely stressful situation, I need to put one foot in front of the other. And as a result, I don't see everything else that's going on. And it's okay to do that in the moment of being in the presence of grave threat. But we are not meant to stay in stress response for weeks and months, like so many of us are. So if you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a business owner, you need access to all parts of your brain right now. You need to act fast. You need to put one foot in front of the other. You need to take purposeful and inspired action, and you need to have access to all parts of your brain. When we're in stress response, all of the doors to other aspects of our brain, it's almost like they're all shut and we can't get to them. I can't get to my hippocampus. And the hippocampus is where we store memory. So if I need to make really important decisions, I need memories to do that. I need to think back on similar times and what I did in those situations. I need access to my prefrontal cortex. That is the front part of the brain. We call it the executive suite of the brain. And it's where really important decisions are made. It's like the CEO center of your brain. I need access to the right side of my brain where creativity lives. You know, this is a time where so many of us really have to be creative and innovative because we are in many cases kind of reinventing so many different aspects of our lives. So we're going to come into a practice in a minute that's a calming practice that if you practice it enough, you can begin to get yourself easily out of stress response so that you can have full access to those really important parts of your brain. So speaking of your brain, typically when we feel stressed and overwhelmed, we're in stress response, but which one? There are two that we tend to go to as our go-tos. As you hear about them, you're going to you can do a pretty good job at identifying what your go-to is. There is stress response. We know about this. In the face of threat and overwhelm, I get ready to fight. I get ready to run. I get ready to freeze or shut down. Fight, flight, freeze. So what we do. And that response, the main hormones that sort of guide that response are cortisol and adrenaline. And wow, cortisol and adrenaline get us ready to go, to fight, to flee, to freeze and shut down. Believe it or not, freezing and shutting down requires a lot of energy. And I'm grateful to my body and my brain that can do this. When there's an intruder in my house, or I'm standing in front of a saber-toothed tiger, or I'm living in a global pandemic, but I'm not meant to live in stress response 24/7. No. Over time, it drains, depletes the system, will make me sick. Pleasure reward response. really guided by the hormone dopamine, which when we're full of dopamine, we feel good. We feel calm, we feel supported. The problem with dopamine is that it wears off quickly, and then we're back to the discomfort again. So the way pleasure reward works is I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling discomfort, I want it to go away. So I seek reward, I seek pleasure, and it might be chocolate, and it might be ice cream, and it might be binge watching Netflix, and it might be scrolling for hours on social media platforms that makes me feel good. It takes me out of the discomfort, but only temporarily. And then I'm back to the discomfort. And then I find myself back into seeking pleasure and reward. We all do this, by the way. Very common, but we are not meant to do it all the time. Again, it will drain and deplete our system. So then there is this third option, and it's one that's pretty new to neuroscience, but we know that it works, but it's chosen. And that's what's really important. Stress response, pleasure reward, pretty much happens automatically. But here's what we can do if we're mindful. The next time that I'm feeling really keyed up, anxious, overwhelmed, triggered, I can say, hey, I'm not going into stress response. I'm not going to do pleasure reward. I'm going to do the tending response, which is guided by the hormone oxytocin. And what I do during the tending response is I acknowledge that stress is here and it's real uncomfortable and I'm feeling really triggered. And rather than running, fighting, shutting down, rather than seeking pleasure and reward, I'm going to tend to the stress that I feel in a very calm and kind manner. The image I have here on the screen, it's like seeing yourself kind of having fallen down, and you're going to pull yourself up off the ground in a kind and loving way. The tend response generates oxytocin, which helps us to feel safe, supported, calm, and keeps us very open to others. In other words, it takes us out of defensive mode, of fight mode. Really, really, really important to know this about oxytocin. It never depletes or drains the system. It is always good. It is always good to have oxytocin present for you and for others. The analogy I like to give is you're watching a child who's learning how to ride his bike, and he falls and skins his knee. And as an adult who's watching, what would you do? You would run to the child, you'd kneel down, you'd help them up, you would tend to their suffering in a kind way. You wouldn't fight, you wouldn't run, you wouldn't freeze, you wouldn't run to Netflix, you would tend to what's there. And we can do that for ourselves. And it sounds really simple, and it's not, because we don't do this for ourselves enough. So it's to acknowledge, oh, this is hard, I'm suffering, but I'm going to tend to it in a really conscious way. I'm going to settle myself down, and I'm going to work to shift out of stress response so I can best make a decision on how I'm going to meet this difficulty that I'm experiencing. So how do we get there? I want to introduce a practice to you called just 6 breaths. It's been theorized that it takes only 6 deep, intentional breaths to take us out of stress response. So this is a very, very quick mindfulness-based practice that you can use anytime, anywhere, and it only takes as long as it takes to take 6 breaths. I'm going to guide us through it so that you can experience it. I'll guide us through a version of it that will take about 3 minutes, just to give you a taste of what it's like. And then you can take it with you and you can use it whenever you need it. So there are 6 breaths that are in this practice. And before we begin, I'm just going to go through each one, because with each breath, you're going to create a point of focus. On the first breath that we'll take together, I want you to just bring your awareness to the very center of your chest. We hold a lot of tightness here. In fact, when we're stressed, we tend to collapse forward and we contract here. So when we do this practice and we breathe and we bring the focus here, we will start to settle and soften the chest, the physical chest, which includes the physical heart and our lungs. In the second breath, I'll be asking you to think of someone that you really care about, someone that you love and feel supported by. In the third breath, I'm going to ask you to think about the experience of being cared for by someone who loves you, someone who supports you. So it's putting you in a position of receiving. In the fourth breath, I'll ask you to think about something you're grateful for. On the fifth breath, I'm just going to ask you to let go of anything that feels really stressful for you or heavy. And on the sixth breath, I'm just going to ask you to be content. Okay? So I want to invite you to practice this with me. I'll be guiding you through. We're actually going to just take 2 preliminary breaths to settle the system, and then we'll move into the 6th breath practice. So I'd like to invite you to sit very comfortably wherever you are. And I want to invite you to close your eyes. And before we begin the formal practice, I want you to take a very deep breath in. And as you exhale, I just want you to allow the jaw and the face and the shoulders to relax. And take another very deep breath in, an exaggerated breath in. And as you exhale, just allow the seat and the legs and the feet to relax. Everything relaxes. And on this next breath, I want you to bring your awareness to the center of that chest. And as you exhale, feeling that part of the body just softening. And on your next inhale, bringing to mind an image of someone you really love and care about. And as you exhale, continue to relax. And as you inhale next, I want you to imagine someone who loves and cares and supports you, just coming into that receiving mode, exhaling as you relax. On this next breath, as you inhale, bringing to mind someone, something about which you are grateful. Taking another deep breath in and letting go of anything that's been heavy for you, anything you're holding on to that feels overwhelming, letting it go. And then one more breath, inhale. And as you exhale, just feel the experience of being content. And now just breathing naturally. Just staying here for just a few more moments, noticing how you feel. And whenever you're ready, and only when you're ready, open your eyes. So what just happened? Again, on that first breath, we start to really relax this area of the upper chest, which is perpetually tight when we're carrying stress. In the second breath, the focus on someone we love and support, giving compassion, generates that oxytocin. Third breath, receiving support, receiving compassion, generates the oxytocin. The fourth breath is really powerful. What we know about gratitude is the mind cannot hold thoughts of gratitude, stress, negativity at the same time. So if you want to fast track yourself out of stress response, this is no joke. You think about something or someone about which you are grateful. Try it. You cannot hold gratitude, stress, overwhelm, negativity at the same time, in the same mind. Powerful. Fifth breath, just let go of whatever you're holding on to. You can pick it up again later, but for now, you're just letting it go. And then finally, just being content with what is. I might not like what's happening all around me, but for this moment, I'm just going to sit in this contentment. Just 6 breaths. Now, we did it for a longer period of time. You'll have access to these slides. You can review this practice. But what I really encourage you to do is to walk yourself through this. You can walk yourself through it like we did and experience it a little bit more slowly. But again, if I'm in a pinch and I'm in a potentially really stressful situation where I might lose it, I'm ready to go into that high reactivity. I just bring myself right to my breath and I walk myself through each of the steps. Just 6 breaths to create significant change. So I am hoping that today's session was helpful for you. Again, it's my honor and my pleasure to be here with you during this very strange, unprecedented time. Just sort of a little recap. Please go back and think about that notion of reframing. How can I look at this situation differently? Be clear about your fears. Work with the SCARF model. Keep yourself in check. Understand others better using that model. Remembering that you always have the power to choose. You don't have to go into stress response or pleasure reward. You can go into tend. And this is the way you can get there. Just 6 breaths. If you need anything, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can just email me at Christine@meetyourcenter.com. Visit the Studio B portal. There's lots of good stuff in there.